Welcome to the Kind Heartfulness podcast, exploring the inner reaches of the heart and mind, brought to you by Rangsheng Yeshe Gomde, Germany-Austria, and your host, Erric Solomon.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Kind Heartfulness podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Annie Heckman. She's an associate translator at the 84,000 Project, translating the words of the Buddha. And we're going to be talking about Buddha's nuns, and at the time of the Buddha, and how that led to a series of guidelines called the Vinaya. Also, what's interesting is how those stories inform our lives in the modern world. Dr. Annie Heckman was born in Chicago and is an associate translator for the 84,000 Project, whose research focuses on stories about nuns in the Vinaya, with a special emphasis on the 14th century Tibetan editorial and digesting practices. And this is, the main subject of our talk today. She holds an MA and PhD degrees from the University of Toronto's Department of Studies of Religion and Book History and Print Culture Collaborative Program, as well as a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the University of Illinois Chicago and a Master of Fine Arts from New York University in Studio Arts. She has a fascinating background and makes for a very interesting conversation, as you'll soon find out. She also studied the Tibetan language and literature at the University of Chicago Graham School prior to pursuing graduate work in Buddhist studies. She's taught at DePaul University, contributed to the Bird of Paradise Press in Virginia. She's among the first three recipients of the annual Sadra Foundation Dissertation Fellowship for Tibetan Buddhist Studies, with a thesis on the Vinaya narratives involving nuns. And now you can join me in welcoming Dr. Annie Heckman to our program. So, Dr. Annie Heckman, welcome to the Kind Heartfulness podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And maybe you can tell people a little bit about what it is you do in relation to translation and your other work in the Dharma.
Sure. So I am an associate translator with 84,000. So that means I spend the majority of my time translating, and I specialize on Vinaya texts. So I translate stories about monks and nuns and how rules were formed during the life of the Buddha. And I also participate in study groups locally. So I'm part of the Bodhi Path Center at Natural Bridge, Virginia. And we recently have been studying the life of the Buddha together in preparation for 8 stupas coming to our center, which is great. And my own research, I study basically how Tibetan scholars sorted through Vinaya texts a long time ago, and they figured out a lot back then that we still haven't quite figured out now. So I look at Bhutan Rinchen Drup's work from the mid-14th century.
Wow. So what you're saying is that there's a lot of the why don't you explain first what Vinaya is, and then I'll do my question. I keep getting feedback from people that I'm allowing too many terms to go undefined. So I'm trying to become more disciplined about that. So please explain to us about Vinaya.
Absolutely. So funny that you said you're becoming more disciplined about it. So sometimes people translate Vinaya as discipline. It is monastic law, is often just how I describe it. There are several different Vinayas. So we have 6 that exist right now, and they're full sort of codes for monks and nuns. And they include everything from group corporate procedures, like how to run a retreat, how to perform ordinations, etc. All of those kinds of things, down to the more minute details of how an individual monk or nun should conduct themselves. So when I say Vinaya, really it's monastic law, Buddhist monastic law. Yeah.
And when people hear rules, if they're like me, they often go, so how do we relate to that rules? How do you see it?
So I definitely didn't embark on my studies excited about studying rules. I hadn't thought of it that way. But if you think of even the kinds of entertainment that a lot of us consume, a lot of us like courtroom dramas. We like to see what happens when people bump up against the law. This is a very big interest. Mm-hmm. Also, we talk a lot about personal boundaries, like you have to set a boundary with someone or tell them this or that isn't okay. So in that sense, I think the themes that we encounter in Vinaya are very interesting and also very normal, very pertinent to our everyday lives. I think there's this image maybe of monks and nuns behaving perfectly, and that must be extremely boring, I think, is maybe why. Why people think that, like if someone's behaving perfectly, like where's the drama? But people's lives are very messy, and they're messy in the legal codes as well. And so it's really kind of a chance to understand how the Buddha dealt with that, with the fact that we do have the capacity for awakening, but we are very much people with messy lives and a lot of habits that might get on each other's nerves, or that might be very distracting or difficult for donors to stomach. So if monks or nuns are behaving in a certain way, then that they wouldn't be supported, then the Vinaya really addresses that as well. So the Vinayas deal with all of these themes, and I find them very fascinating.
So that's interesting, because what I hear you saying is that the Vinaya is a support, I guess, for awakening. Is that do I have that right?
I mean, I do see it that way. So I wear different hats. So when I'm in like a historian mode, I see it in a certain way. It's very normal for groups to form codes of conduct or, systems for how they should operate. And so the Vinayas are very similar to other forms of law from India at that time. So in that way, it's a very normal thing to do for a community to organize itself like that. But also written into the Vinayas is this idea that there is this potential. So many of the people that you meet in the Vinayas are actually arhats already. So they, you get to watch them become arhats. So you see them training in a story, and then someone like Mahakashyapa, for example, or Bhadra, like they will become an arhat, but it doesn't mean that their lives are over, and it doesn't mean that conflict is over. They're still going to have to navigate all kinds of situations because they're in the world.
And arhat is what?
An arhat. Oh, okay. So we're defining. Yes. So an arhat. So in the context of the Vinayas, these are really sources that are associated with the highest attainment as a student of the Buddha being arhatship. So one who is free of the afflictions, and so really free of emotional afflictions. So a very realized person.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So these rules, in essence, are there as a support to help practitioners. Well, one, have a way to negotiate being in this kind of community, monastic community, but also then to further their progress to become themselves arhats.
I do think so, and there are different arguments. So about exactly how much of like a spiritual path is embedded in the Vinayas. And so I come from a more like a social historical training in terms of how we look at the Vinayas. But there are these moments like when a rule is made because whatever is happening is disturbing the basic functions of a monastic community, like recitation and meditation and so forth. So there's that. And also I think you can kind of see when you read enough of these stories, it's not like there's one way that things would have been done that the Buddha could have imported and just set it up in advance. The stories are responsive. So it's actually monks and nuns engaging in different kinds of behavior. And then these are in the the formation of rules for individual monks and nuns, as they engage in certain forms of behavior, then the conflict that it creates gets back to the Buddha. Mm-hmm. And then that person is a sort of first offender, so to speak. So they haven't actually broken a rule yet. Sometimes they're very mischievous, but then the Buddha will then say, okay, such and such a kind of action is an offense. And there are different types of offenses. Some are more serious than others. But I see that as, the community has a job to do and they're trying to work together. And for very practical purposes, if something causes a certain kind of disruption, then the Buddha just, makes a rule, and that sort of creates a procedure, at least for them to try to stop that behavior happening or to regulate that behavior.
But I think it's interesting because what I'm getting from what you're saying is that we're not just given a list of rules, but we're given a set of stories that actually explain how the rule came into being, which for someone like myself who has a lot of trouble following rules, I think that helps me sometimes to understand, why this is that, am I following this?
Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. So what, where to start? So I know, I often say these stories, they're a bit like sitcoms in some cases and like true crime also. So there's this, for me, and some of the stories are not funny, but some of them are funny. Like some of them are, especially for lighter rules, sometimes it's like, like a nun may engage in something that's just really over the top, but it makes it memorable. So whoever redacted these codes and put these stories down on paper, I think had a way of making sure that if you wanted to know what the rule meant, you could keep it. I can remember most of the stories, and I'm not even, a monastic. So the Pratimoksha Sutras, for monks and nuns, this is usually what people think of when they think of the Vinaya. So it's the actual recitation that's done, the fortnightly recitation, and it's a reminder of all the rules. But some of the rules are very brief. It might not be entirely clear why you would or wouldn't do something. Why is it a problem to wrap or unwrap a package? That kind of, some of it might not be apparent. And in the Vinayas, so in the Mular Vinaya that I translate, there are these very big sections called vibhangas, and the vibhangas are explanations of the rules. So they go through each rule and give explanations, and it's a story. So it's, it started in this place, and then so-and-so went out for alms, they encountered this situation, here's how they behaved. And then usually the sort of formula is, in the case of a story about a nun, the nuns told the monks told the Buddha, and then the Buddha said, and you have your rule. So all of those rules are actually, in the sort of story world, are part of the story. It's actually the Buddha taking in a situation and then saying, okay, from now on, here's how, if you do this, it's this kind of offense. Like this is no more, this is not happening anymore. And I do see, again, wearing different hats, looking at it more from a practice standpoint, I see it as there's this kind of very kind, the things that he deals with. It's like if you had an HR department that always answered the phone and always said, here's how we're going to deal with this. Like, you don't have to leave, just don't do this. That's right. Sort of it's a very tender thing to see that he would deal with all kinds of, hygiene, everything. Like the Buddha in these stories is dealing with every aspect of life. So when we think that we're going to a Dharma center and doing something different, and then we can go home and behave however we want, and nobody cares and nobody sees, okay, as a layperson, maybe okay, you could say that, but there are ideas about ways to create less conflict, right? Like put the lid on the water so that, things don't fall in. Like just these very basic things. I think we can attend to all the details of everyday life with the knowledge that it matters, if we are fans of the Vinaya, as stories.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, maybe is there a way we can talk about this in present time? What do you think the message is for us as practitioners then, with all these? Is there a message, or does this only apply to monks and nuns?
So it's a good question, and there are different opinions about who should read the Vinayas. So just because of being a translator and sort of a student of these topics, I have a sort of different perspective on it, or just dispensation on it. So depending on how someone comes to the material, I do think that for anyone who decides to, and who has the sort of the circumstances to read the Vinayas, there is so much there for just understanding that every action has an effect. It may be a local effect. Not all of them are, how do I say, it's not all a matter of being holy. There's also this aspect of just dealing with things as they come. And we don't get to actually separate completely from messy behavior, or if someone is, I'm trying to think of a good example. Like, no matter how good you act, let's say that you have a really, like, let's take an example of someone who's just like a star practitioner, and they are doing everything they possibly can. It doesn't mean that people won't gossip about them. It doesn't mean that someone won't start a rumor about them, right? It could still happen. Yeah. And if you read the Vinayas, you have company, you have friends who also had that experience. This is so normal. There are characters in the Vinayas who are there just to push buttons. So in the monks' stories, we have the group of 6, or among the monks, we have the group of 6, and then the group of 12 in the nuns. There are twice as many misbehaving nuns as monks. And these are characters who are exclusively there to push buttons. So even, I don't think that any of these characters ever really do much positive. They bend, they sort of try to push the rules that exist. And then also, like, if Mahakashyapa is sharing his alms with Bhadra and he's doing it in a kind way, they'll be like, oh, look at you sharing alms with Bhadra. It's this very like just completely they'll like throw suspicion on even good actions, So I think that it can seem, I know that sometimes when we talk about a path or making progress, or, it can seem like those kinds of things shouldn't happen anymore at some point. But indeed, even for arhats in the life of the Buddha, it is the case that, according to these stories, people were gossiping about them and causing all kinds of problems, and, and hurting them also, like in an exterior way, at least. Or an external way, at least, that it wasn't like everyone just saw them floating through the air and was nice to them. Yeah. So I think that's where I always, not that I'm not the perfect person that I used in my hypothetical scenario, but really not expecting samsara to look any different than it does in that way. It was only going to look different internally. It may not pan out externally. Yeah.
No, sorry. I think this is what you're saying. It touches me personally, because I see so many people who are practicing the Dharma very, very sincerely, and then take it so personally that things aren't working out, yeah. And they're like, and it's kind of like, they don't say the Dharma doesn't work. They say instead, I'm just not very good practitioner because I'm encountering all these problems. And then you're like, but no, if you read these scriptures, they happen to everyone. Even these pretty realized beings had some pretty amazing obstacles that they had to negotiate. And maybe it's because of that they were. So one of my teachers once said, negativity doesn't mess with small fry. And I think he was talking about the Buddha sitting under the tree just before he became enlightened, and all the different maras that came, to try to distract him. And so I think that's maybe it's a very encouraging message just to hear, yes, samsara is messy. Life is messy. And here, we've all had to go through it, and this is one way we can work it out. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I fully agree. And these texts aren't even talking about the Bodhisattva path, which adds another level, for sure. Or several other levels, you could say. But it doesn't mean making it. So yeah, just the fact that making progress, these characters are sometimes murdered, they're sometimes assaulted. And we could look at it in terms of experiencing that last bit of karma. The stories usually have that accounting of it, of just and it does happen. And I think it's nice to see this also, that when things happen in the Vinayas, often the monks or nuns will ask the Buddha, or usually the monks will ask, why did this happen? Why did this happen? Or why does this person keep doing this? And he'll tell a story about their past lives. And so there's that sense that, these are just our conditions. We really, there's a lot to accept in it. And it doesn't mean that it's going to sort of, it doesn't mean the sort of messy stuff stops. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have maybe you have a good story from your research you could share, meaning about the Vinaya?
Sure, absolutely. So I did share this during the talk at Gomde, but I'll share it again. Just Kirsha Gautami. So, and maybe I'll just share this other aspect of it. So, the way that I encountered this story was that I was translating Bhutan Rinchen Drup's digest. So he took all of these stories and made them just like a Reader's Digest. He made it into a nice, concise format. And I noticed that the Nuns.
This is in the 14th century or something like that?
Yeah, so 1352. So, and I don't know, honestly, how there's a lot, it's a long story, but he had a lot to arrange, a lot to sort through, and he did it. And I, go through spreadsheets trying to figure out exactly how he did it. But
computer.
He must have had a computer, or have been extremely, I think it was so brilliant and well motivated. So in the stories, I noticed as I was translating these during the time I was working on my dissertation, the nun Stulananda, she sometimes calls the other nuns names. So there are various stories where she's often, like, if she's jealous or something, she'll say, oh, like Mahaprajapati, she is like a self-starter, because, Mahaprajapati started the Sangha, for nuns, or she started the ordination process for nuns by requesting over and over. So she's like, oh, she just did it herself, whatever, DIY, she kind of gives her this, and then, she insults Utpalavarna, who was a sex worker. So she mentions this. And then she says, Kirsha Gautami was a flesh eater, a child flesh eater, and a tomb dweller, a tomb enterer, actually, I think is the term that she uses. So I was like, what's going on? And I mean, some of these stories, so the story of Kirsha has been translated actually years ago. But I like it as a reminder for the value of the Vinayas. So maybe this actually connects thematically to what you were asking. But Kirsha was betrothed. She married a man, had a child, and then was pregnant again, and they were on the road to go visit her family. And she started to go into labor. Her husband was bitten by a snake while he was sitting by a tree. So it was sort of like all while they're, if you imagine, kind of going to a rest stop and everything starts to go wrong. So thieves have stolen, oxen and wagon wheels. It's kind of chaos. And she, after giving birth, then has two children. So she has essentially like a toddler and an infant. And there's a huge storm, and the river it's kind of blocking between where she is and where her family is. And the river's flooding, and she has to sort of just like swim and push, put one child across and come back for the other. She can't just cross. And so she ends up placing one child on the far shore and trying to come across with another, but then a jackal goes after her first child, and she's trying to wave the jackal away. And in the process, one child drowns, the other one is actually eaten by a jackal, and she's stuck in this impossible situation, comes out of the river, has just lost everything. So her husband has been bitten by a snake and died. They've been robbed. Her children are both dead. I mean, it's so extreme. And yet these are the kinds of things that actually do happen. These kinds, it's when, whenever I'm telling the story or even reading summaries of it, it sounds extreme, but usually I think many of us just distance ourselves from people who have these kinds of circumstances. If we can, it sounds extreme for someone to have one thing after another. We sort of blame something about their lifestyle, but this is supposed to have happened in the story. And as she goes on, she finds out from a neighbor of her family that her whole family has died in the storm. Their home was struck by lightning. She goes then to, she finds a new place to go. She finds a woman who's spinning yarn, and this woman kind of takes her in and introduces her to a weaver. And often in the Vinyas, unfortunately, I know some wonderful weavers, but in the Vinyas, often weavers are kind of tough and mean in these stories. And so she marries him, but he's like very cruel, and it says he beats her every day. So she's in this kind of domestic violence situation. And then the woman who introduced them encourages her to have a baby. So I think this is so interesting because these are the kinds of, this is like, this is why people watch Jerry Springer, right? Like there's this kind of extreme, like one bad thing after another. And then someone gives her this very difficult advice, and you're reading it like, no, Krishna, go, don't, no, so it's really a sort of, it's so interesting to me to see these in very old stories, to see these situations. So she's pregnant. Her husband goes out around the time that she's about to go into labor, and he returns home drunk, and the door is locked. And because the door is locked, she can't open it. She can't get up to open it and let him in. So he's furious. And the next morning, she's like, welcome home. You have a son. You have a child. And he is instantly very jealous and says, put a pot of oil on the stove. And he tells her to boil it. And then he says, put the child in. And he really, it's a very brief statement about his internal state, but it's like he's sure that this child and the mother are like going to destroy him. He has this kind of a jealousy. So he tells her to put the child in and cook it and then to eat it. And he's physically forcing her to do these things. So she does. And then she, when he regrets it, I guess we can say that much for that character. Yeah. He regrets it. He's I think sleeping, and then she escapes. She marries a caravan leader. It is a long story. She marries a caravan leader who then.
You were talking about sitcoms. This is like a mini series.
It's a mini series, yeah. So this is one, and a lot of times the stories about the foremost nuns are more dramatic, I would say, or there's more, in this case, the sitcoms are like when Stulananda does something bad, or that's the point when she's, shouting things about the other nuns. But it goes on. She loses one more husband, I'll say, and then she marries a king. So
she keeps trading up at least.
She keeps kind of meeting different people, and it sort of also tells you about the circumstances. Like she had nowhere to go in these different cases, right? And so then he dies, and she's buried with him, but she's still alive. The tomb is robbed, and she sneezes. And this is the one part where I always say, like, okay, I'm not going for this being a funny story, but this one part where she sneezes is a little bit funny because she sneezes, so it makes a noise, and then the robbers who are coming to the tomb go like, "Oh my gosh, it's a zombie!" So they freak out, and she escapes, and she digs her way out. So this is why Stulananda is calling her a tomb dweller, or this kind of insult. And so all of this is like, you just imagine what would a person look like after that, and it's this. I think honestly, for me, it's one of the most beautiful passages in Buddhist literature. That she goes out on the road. She's gone mad, basically. Her hair, like everything is in disarray. Her clothes are torn. So she's not dressed properly anymore at all. She doesn't care. She's just walking totally distraught. And the Buddha, she sees the Buddha from a distance. The Buddha sees her, and he tells Ananda, go put a mantle, a shawl like this, go put this on her. And she goes, and then and that's it. And so when I think of refuge and when I think of conversion, like there's something for absolutely everybody. That's like where these stories really touch me, is that this is not, the Buddha wasn't like, oh, she is a disaster. Like that's how he responded, right? He saw someone who had fully understood suffering. Like you can't tell someone who's gone through that.
Yeah.
That there's something for them in samsara, right? So she's fully convinced, and she takes refuge. And then Ananda who's often known for being kind to women, he is there, and he brings her a shawl or a mantle. And she goes on to become foremost in the Vinaya. So different nuns have different talents or different sort of things that they're the best at. And she is the most knowledgeable about the Vinaya. And so every once in a while, Stulananda will try to get younger nuns to go do something horrible, just be like, you're good looking, like go marry a caravan leader. Like this happens. And then Kersha is the one to straighten them out. So she'll say, oh, you think you want to go do that? Let me tell you what my story is. And so her story is this kind of cautionary tale. It's absolutely beautiful. But I love that, that it's not like a judgmental, there's no judgment about what happened before, or why did you do this, or why, or how did you not get out of that? That's not how it is. It's just the Buddha fully welcomes her.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of amazing. And it also shows that, like, she even married a king, and everything ends up in suffering.
Yes, exactly.
None of it worked out. And that's,
Yeah, exactly. Right, exactly. That even all the circumstances, in a way, I mean, you can analyze it as when her happiness was dependent on partnership or a man or family life, that was the hinge for her to always be. It's like that was sort of her karma to experience that, and that she had. That was like her clue. That's the story she had to go through so many times to then be open to that sort of vision of the Buddha. So, yeah.
Wow, that's a great story, and told very nicely, I might add.
Thank you. There are so many moving parts. It's from the Kshudraka Vastu. So this is a section that I actually, I didn't translate. Well, I translated it for my own interest, but it's not the main text I work on, but it's a section of the Vinaya that has, of the Vinaya preserved in Tibetan, that has a lot of like really rich material about nuns. So.
Wow, that's great. So I'm curious, so how do you manage all this stuff that you're doing? I mean, I saw on your website, you even have a small publishing company. You first got an MFA, a Master of Fine Arts, and working artist, and then got a PhD, and all while supporting yourself and so on, all the things that we do. How do you, and then find time to practice even? So I think that's something that a lot of us struggle with, is how do we fit it all in? So how do you fit it all in? What have you learned?
Oh gosh, such a good question. So, I did have a career in the arts. So I went to New York University back in the early 2000s, received my MFA. It's still like a part of my life that I treasure, but when I was making work, some of the themes I were dealing with had to do with impermanence and mortality, for example. So I was interested, a little bit interested, I would say, in Buddhism and in Buddhist texts. And I always kind of felt like I wish I could get past sort of the Wikipedia version of this in some way, or, know more about it. But it was a lot. It's just, like when you walk into a bookshop and everything is like words that you don't understand. It was not easy. So
I'm a different generation. When I walked into a bookshop, there were like 6 books. And now the problem is there's just this overwhelming number. It's hard to know where to begin.
Yeah, so much. And I think I was a little bit.
And actually, 5 of the books were by Gunther, and you couldn't understand any of it.
This was I think some of my first copies of things were usually from used bookshops. So it would have been, Gunther, like different translations where I go like, this is, like it's super. It sounds like really like, I don't know how to say, not necessarily approachable, sort of very esoteric, I would say. It was maybe the very first things I encountered. But I was working at DePaul University in Chicago. I was teaching full-time, but as a visiting faculty. And it's kind of a long story, but I had lots of changes in my life happen. I had a divorce, and I had lots of questions about what it meant to be alive. And I was, I was not religious. Like, I had grown up in the Catholic Church, and I had been sort of self-labeled agnostic for a very long time. And a friend of mine said, you should really go meditate. And she told me about, it was the Bodhi Path in Chicago. So Dharma teacher Rachel Parrish was there. And she told me to go. My understanding is that she told me several times, and I ignored her. And finally, I was like, oh, I really am interested, or it was sort of like I was finally giving in or something. And so she suggested it again, and I went. And the first time I went, Dharma teacher Rachel was teaching about the 8 worldly concerns, and it made total sense. Sort of, just that same thing where something just clicks, where it really makes sense. And in any case, then I started down the path to learn Tibetan language, and that's how I got. So then, just to kind of connect the dots there, that's how I got involved. I wanted to understand the names of the 35 Buddhas, and I was not satisfied with phonetics. I wanted to really understand, and I got more and more involved from that point, and pursued my PhD at University of Toronto. So throughout all of that, like, those aren't necessarily all the best lifestyle decisions, I guess you could say, in terms of, like what, like career coaching, like go, get a terminal degree in fine arts, and then in, the translation of Buddhist monastic texts. But it so happened that the Sutra Foundation was offering their dissertation fellowship. And so I was in a situation with, I put in a lot of time on the degree. I was really fortunate with my mentors, and I, needed time to write. And so Cedra Fellowship really saved me in that sense. And I had a young baby at the time. So it was a lot. So there's that kind of balance. And I think, so to get back to your actual question, one of the things in terms of balancing it all, I think it is such a matter of having priorities. And so many of us who have like pieced together incomes in different ways, like, especially in the arts, it's very normal to have a few different jobs to fill in. And I happen to have finished at a time when 84,000 was employing, full-time translators, which is just absolutely a gift, and just like a wonderful development. And I was not expecting that to be the case. So that really changes things a lot. But I find that, when you have something to translate, like the first text that I translated for them was 600 pages. And so that means that for a year and a half, I better stay focused. Like, I can't suddenly decide I'm interested in something else. And so, or if I do, I better limit the amount of time I spend on it. Right. So what I find is having short-term goals that you can really accomplish is very helpful. And then routines are so powerful. So, as like for example, so in terms of practice, I drop my daughter off at school early in the morning, and then the stupa that I go to practice by is, when I'm leaving the school, if I turn right, it takes me towards the stupa. Like, I have a few miles to go, but it takes me towards the stupa. If I turn left, I go home. Mm-hmm. And so, I always try to translate with a fresh mind. So I try to practice before translation, and, if at all possible. People may have different opinions about time management, but I always consider it very worthwhile to do that. Mm-hmm. So I just told myself one morning, okay, it's a right turn to go there. It's harder to make a left turn than a right turn. So this is just what I'm doing. And so building that in as a routine, and not really making it a question of every day, am I or am I not going to do this, but just trying to have very basic routines, I find so helpful. And that's something I did not always have. So along the way, but that's helped me quite a bit. And I'd say any progress that I made, like when I was working on my dissertation, similarly, I'd say if I need to sit down for 4 hours a day where I'm only doing this without any emails, without anything else, and I will write. And if I continue doing that, some days were 10 hours, but as long as I sat down and worked for 4 hours, that was enough to make progress. Yeah.
So,
Sorry, that's a long answer.
I think, no, it's really good. There were just so many points there that I was kind of like, yeah, that strikes a chord. I think that one of the most important things you said is that you make a routine so that you don't have to have even the decision, do I do it or do I not do it? And I found myself, I worked in Silicon Valley, which people sometimes call the black hole of work. And yeah, I mean, brutal, long days and weeks and months and years. But anyway, I just made a promise that every morning I would do some minimum thing. And the nice thing is my bedroom, you had to walk out of the bedroom through the meditation room to get anywhere else in the house. So it's kind of right there even. And I would just start and, not necessarily for so long, but that I always did something every day. And of course I had more time to do more. I think that is, over the years, talking to different people, maybe the most common and most effective thing that people have told me is, well, I just promised myself I'm going to do this every day. And that's that.
Yeah. And I think I like learning about cognitive biases. And we have this bias that in the future, I'll be great at this, whatever, in the future, I'll want to work out and it'll be fine. And so we plan for that, but it's to plan for the opposite, that in the future, I might feel especially lazy, or I might feel especially not interested in such and such an activity. And so it's like setting up a system that sort of nudges you into it is very helpful.
Yeah, it's funny because actually now I have a very unstructured lifestyle. I don't have to do, it's like sometimes I write, so you can do that at any time you want, sort of. And I have usually a bunch of correspondence I have to get to. And I do have a lot of Zoom and WhatsApp. That's also true. So that's kind of ends up being at specific times. But basically, because I spent this period of life where I just start my day every day with practice, now it doesn't matter. I feel lazy even now, having done, all these different kinds of meditation exercises for so long. But still, I just have this habit. You just start. It's not a question, and it's turns out to be even more of a benefit when I have a very unstructured lifestyle than when I had this very, like my month was already predetermined from the get-go.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, and this is something I think that there's so much that we learn about how we value our lifetime. Like when someone decides to meditate, it's like you're actually deciding to sort of do nothing, so to speak, for, in a world that's very focused on capital and, creating wealth and all this, and it's very productivity focused. And so, it's just that your awakening matters. That's what, when when I'm in the sort of study group context with Dharma Center friends, like your awakening matters. It does. It really matters. And to have the humility to know that means doing something over and over again and getting accustomed to sitting there or doing a sadhana practice, whatever it is. And also that when you have a daily practice, things like the world cannot shake you as much as it can if you don't. I just really think it's true that when you're, for anyone who has the conditions to have a practice every day, then things happen around you, but you sort of know who you are in a different way, or what the purpose of being alive is. Really it's pretty profound. And I know for myself, when I don't have at least that minimum structure at times in my life, when I haven't, it can be very easy to get thrown off course, which for me would mean maybe like taking advice from someone who I shouldn't really listen to, or, there are all kinds of ways, that sort of messy life we talked about at the beginning. I feel like daily practice really is a way to habituate and not be pulled apart like that. So
yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
Well, I think maybe this is a very good place to leave it. That's your awakening matters.
Your awakening matters. Yeah. Yeah. Your awakening, how in every part of everyday life, I think is very, it's just kind of amazing that we're here.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope you'll consider coming back and doing another podcast with us.
Oh, I would love to.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's great. It's a delight, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Yeah, my pleasure. I'm really sending my best to everyone at Gomde. It's so wonderful to visit there.
Yes, one of my favorite places. So thank you, and take care.
You too. Take care.
Thanks for listening. If you have enjoyed today's podcast, we like to invite you to continue the journey into the heart of enlightened mind at gomde.eu.